Luigi once numbered among the finest jewel thieves in the city. He never made as much money as some of the gangsters he came up with, but he also never got caught. Alas, a life of crime doesn't offer the best retirement plan. And so when the time came for Luigi to hang up his sneakers, he settled down to live out his days in a quiet, simple shack at the edge of the woods. He appreciated the solitude, but at times he admitted something was missing. He wanted a television. He planned one more heist. More of a long con, really, but most certainly a victimless crime. It was common practice those days to bury the dead with a coin on each eye, so that the recently deceased souls could pay the ferryman to transport them onto the next world. Luigi didn't believe in that stuff. Mumbo jumbo. A waste of coins, if you asked him. Every other week, he would make a call to his old friend Greg, a security guard at the old cemetery in the bad part of town, and ask him where the fresh graves had been dug. The gravediggers at the old cemetery were decent men. They dug their graves shallow. Maybe they wanted the dead to feel the rain. Maybe they were a little lazy. Either way, it made life easy for Luigi, who would dig up a fresh corpse, swipe the coin off its eyes, then rebury the body. On a good night, he could dig up 5 former human beings and leave with 10 coins. Then he'd head home to his shack, put the coins in an old ceramic vase, and count the days until he had enough saved up for the color TV. One morning, Luigi sat drinking bitter coffee and reading the newspaper. The appliance giant was having a one-day sale the next day, the newspaper said. All TVs half off, including the big one Luigi always dreamed of. He finished his breakfast and went to count his coins. Only about 20 away, he estimated. It would be a hard night, the most coins he'd ever gathered. But if he put his nose to the grindstone, he could get the TV and finally be done with the thievery game forever. He dialed Greg's number. "Any chance you guys got 20 new bodies since the last time I've been there?" Luigi asked.
"Business is slow,"
Greg answered.
"I ain't seen a funeral for days. Modern medicine. You know how it is."
"The appliance giant is having a sale," Luigi said. "I can almost afford that TV." Greg, the security guard, fell silent for a few moments. They were old friends, but Luigi knew Greg was uncomfortable with their arrangement. Getting Luigi out of the cemetery for good would help them both sleep better at night.
"There's that ancient section, way out the back, next to the mausoleums,"
he said.
"Bodies a little deeper, the coins a little rarer. Might could be enough to get you the TV before dawn? I don't know."
"That would be perfect," Luigi said. "You won't ever hear from me again after this, I promise." "Gates unlocked," Greg said. That night he went to work, silently crossing the cemetery into the restricted area Greg told him about. It was colder on this side of the graveyard, which Luigi appreciated. He dug twice as fast to keep warm. Soon enough, his shovel thwacked against the first coffin. He opened it up. 2 silver coins with skulls on them gleamed in the moonlight. He snatched them up. Then his blood froze. The eyes of the corpse were staring back at him. That couldn't be right. Any undertaker worth his salt would have closed the lids before putting the coins on those eyes. He shivered and started shoveling dirt back on the body without reclosing the coffin. The next 3 corpses unearthed the same problem. The coins increased in their rareness and value, but each time he removed them, the dead stared back blankly at him. Each time he panicked and shoveled dirt back on top without closing the coffin, each set of eyes seemed more lifelike than the last. By the 5th body, he could swear the eyes were watching as he shoveled. By the 7th, he could swear he saw one blink. The coins were even rarer than he'd hoped. They were certainly enough for the TV. He didn't even bother to refill the final grave. He was never coming back. It was Greg's problem now. The sun was up by the time he reached his shack. The appliance giant would open soon. He headed into his old truck and drove into town. The salesman balked when Luigi tried to pay for the TV with a vase full of old coins. He called the manager over. who pulled out a magnifying glass. "These are rare coins for sure," the manager said. "We'll take them. The TV's yours. My guy here will load it into your truck." Luigi drove home, set up the TV, turned on his favorite crime show, and fell immediately into a deep, dreamless sleep. He awoke sometime after midnight. The TV was still on. A show he'd never seen. A man sitting alone on a couch in a quiet shack. It was Luigi. He stood up. The version of himself on the TV did the same. He walked toward the TV and changed the channel. The Luigi on the TV did the same. Otherwise, the image did not change. He switched the channel again, then switched the channel again. The Luigi show was playing on every single one. He figured there must be some sort of camera inside the set. He got up and took a closer look. For the first time, the Luigi on TV did not mirror him. Something off-screen distracted the TV Luigi. A knock had come at his door. The on-screen Luigi looked very frightened. Luigi watched in horror as a shadow appeared behind his doppelganger. There was something else in the shack. He spun around. In the real world, he was still alone. Whatever it was only coming for the TV character. Off-screen, you could hear a window smash open, footsteps crunching over shattered glass. Luigi screamed out a warning to the television. Maybe they heard him. 7 corpses fell upon the TV Luigi. They tore at him for a few moments, then receded as quick as they had come. The TV Luigi lay frozen on the ground for a few moments. Finally, he got up and turned his face to the monitor. His eyes were gone. Luigi tried desperately to turn off the TV. Nothing happened. He put his foot through the screen. Sparks flew everywhere. He kicked and kicked and kicked until, finally, his foot went right through the screen and the image blinked off. All that work for nothing. He shot up on the couch. It had all been a dream. The TV was off and intact. He relaxed, but just for a moment. It was slightly after midnight. He heard soft scratching at the front door. A loud thud against his only window. Footsteps in the darkness behind him. Something switched on the TV. Winston met a girl one night at the sock hop. This story takes place in modern times. It was an ironic sock hop in the hipster part of town. They danced under the stars. She got cold, so he gave her his jacket. At the end of the night, he drove her home. She kissed him goodnight, but it left him cold. He didn't think much about this at the time, because he drove away before remembering to get his coat back. He figured that's what was causing his plummeting body temperature. The next day, he returned to the girl's house and knocked on the door. A sad old woman answered the door. "She hasn't lived here for 50 years, the sad old woman said. "Go to 666 Dead Man's Ave. That's where she is." The 50-year thing was a little confusing. The girl looked barely older than him, but Winston really liked that coat. It was a leather bomber jacket, very in style and half price at Nordstrom Rack, but still very expensive, so he went over to Dead Man's Ave, which was in the cemetery district in the bad part of town. He found his jacket resting on a grave with a picture of the girl on it. She'd been dead for 50 years, but that's not the scary part of this story. This had happened to Winston before. He'd been single for a while and spent a lot of time walking in the bad part of town, and a decent proportion of the girls he danced with turned out to be dead the whole time. He put the coat on and immediately felt warmer, despite the fact that its most recent wearer was a ghost. He turned to leave the cemetery, but some supernatural force seemed to hold him in place. It was actually the roots of a sentient tree, a few feet away from the girl's grave, which had wrapped around his ankles. "My friend wants to talk to you," the tree said in a creepy tree voice. "Don't even think about leaving." Winston laughed at the pun, because he had a good sense of humor. A glowing skeleton in a sailor hat materialized in front of the tree. He brandished a flaming sword in Winston's direction. "I heard you kissed my girlfriend," the skeleton said. I didn't know she had a skeleton boyfriend, Winston said with a sigh, because the kissing strangers who he didn't know had a boyfriend thing had lately been happening just as often as the kissing dead girls thing. I didn't even know she lived at the cemetery. She lives somewhere else, the tree said. No one lives in a cemetery. We're all dead. Stay out of this, Danny, the skeleton said to the sentient tree. I'm going to chop this dude in half with my skeleton sword. Winston put his hands up. I didn't know, man, he said. Your girl never said anything. The skeleton inched forward. His sword radiated with the volcanic heat of the underworld. Winston began to sweat. I'm going to cut you in half, bro, the skeleton said. Just then, the air pressure dropped and a cold wind swept through the cemetery. The girl's ghost rose from her grave like vapor. Leave him alone, Sergeant Bone, she said to the skeleton. I don't love you anymore. Stay out of this, Sharon, the skeleton said. I'm going to send this dude to hell. It won't make me love you again, she said. Sharon, the skeleton said, heartache somehow pouring through his dead, empty eye sockets. I love you. Then his skull face twisted into a snarl. He screamed and lunged toward the ghost girl with his sword. Winston, who had lately been trying to be more chivalrous, freed himself from the tree roots and dove in front of the ghost girl, who had, of course, safely slipped back into her grave. The sword passed through his heart with a whoosh. For a second, he heard his ancestors scream out in pain. Then a searing heat, a bird pecking on his liver. Then icy cold. He closed his eyes, blood dripping down his eyelids. Then darkness. He awoke in bed screaming, bathed in a cold sweat. It was all a dream. He was still wearing the jacket, which still showed singe marks from the skeleton's flaming sword. There was fresh cemetery dirt on his Nikes, but it was all just a dream. Winston's life was pretty normal from then on, except he suddenly found it impossible to fall in love and dogs stopped barking when he walked past. His life always felt strangely empty, but he figured that was a symptom of the time we all live in. A few years later, he went to the doctor for the routine physical he always put off. I don't know how to say this, the doctor said, before pulling out an X-ray with a large hole in the middle. But it seems your soul was cleaved in half at some point by a demon's sword. I'm afraid that after you die, you will be doomed to roam the earth as one of the damned for all eternity. Oh, Winston said. Otherwise, you're pretty healthy, though, the doctor said. But this did not make Winston feel better.